afternoon to those of you joining us from Europe. Good morning to those from the US. Thank you very much for making the time to join us today. This is very much an introduction to supply diversity, best practices, and hopefully some real takeaways that you can take home with you. Naturally, because we're limited to 1 hour, it doesn't give us the chance to really deep dive on a lot of subjects. But if there are any questions, please do pop them in the chat. We will come back to them later. And this is, of course, a subject that we'll continue to delve in Europe as we go forward. So my name is Jerome Flint. I'm the Regional Director in Europe and the Middle East and North Africa for WEConnect International. And I'm delighted to welcome our fantastic panel with us today. So we have Manuela, who is the Head of Supply Diversity at Diageo, also in partnerships, Lynn in the US. So he is the Head of Supply Diversity and Business Development, as well as the DE&I and Sustainability Advocate at Baker Hughes. We have Sarah, who is the Associate Director for Global Marketing and Procurement and European Supply Diversity Lead at BMS. And then we have Peter, who is Supply Diversity Inclusion, Supplier Inclusion and Diversity Program Lead and Client-Facing at Accenture. Right, so without further ado, why don't we jump straight in? And Crystal, if you're there, please just let me know and we can go forward. So let's just start with an overview here. And maybe Lynn, we can start with you. Why don't you talk to us about your current supply diversity and inclusion efforts? How long has Baker Hughes been running the program formally? What was your impetus to begin? And I think this is also a key point, as we recognize the audience on the call. There are quite a few corporates who perhaps are looking into setting up their program, but don't have one yet.
Right. No, it's a great start. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and good evening, probably as well. So for Baker Hughes, it's been a complex, let's say, journey, because as we know, the Baker Hughes company as it sits today is formed by two companies merging together. So a portion of GE Oil and Gas, or actually the GE Oil and Gas section of GE, as well as the legacy Baker Hughes company. So with those two, we did that in 2015. It's been so long ago that it's hard to remember. But we tried to take some of the best practices by both companies and implement those. Supplier diversity was something that both companies had a history with, but had more or less managed it in two different ways. So when I came into the program in 2021, we had established ourselves in the industry as, we have a supplier diversity program. But based on feedback from our customers, our investors, and our board of directors, we wanted to enhance the program a bit. So my role was created. I was brought in to really put more emphasis on the program, not only internally, but externally. So that's what I set out to do. We really started investing more into supplier diversity because it's a program that you can't just, in my opinion, some of this is biased, but you can't just say we have a supplier diversity program and that's it. You have to make some statements as to what you want that program to look like and what you're willing to do to get it there. So for us, that's an evolution each year. And that doesn't mean we change our strategy each year. We've more or less input a pattern of, hey, we're going to meet together with some of our internal stakeholders, have a strategy discussion, make sure that we're on the same path that we've designed from the very start. And when we need to add some bolt-ons or when we need to pivot because the industry is saying something different or our customers are doing something different, then we do that. But for the most part, it's let's set the path, let's start blazing the trail and get there. So we can say that we've had a program in place since 2019, 2018 maybe. But really, we started tracking the spend from an automated standpoint about 2021, 2022, and really just kick-started things off, added some adrenaline to the program, and we are where we are today. Our spend has, I would say, tripled since I took over. And I'm not saying that's to me, because I have a great team and we have great advocates for the program. But like I said, we knew we needed to do some different things, so we set out to really put those in place.
And I think one of the key things that we see is also that a lot of the spend growth is in North America, and that actually Europe is just a very small percentage.
Correct.
Manuela, maybe you could touch upon it then from a European perspective. So obviously Diageo is global, but what did it look like for you then in Europe, building a supply diversity program, and why? What is the point of it? And maybe just before we get there, a warm welcome to Crystal, who is joining us. So she is the head of supply diversity EMEA for Meta, and delighted to have her as well. Manuela, please.
Yeah, so thank you, Jerome. I think how it worked in Diageo was based on our overarching ESG ambition. So basically, in November 2020, we launched our Spirit of Progress ambition, which is our ESG ambition, and then alongside that ambition, we laid out 25 goals. One of those goals was supply diversity. And we built on the great work done in North America for more than 7 years, but we didn't have this program across the rest of the world. So we launched Europe as well as our program in the other regions. We did a wider launch across the globe at the same time. And I think the first thing we did was to really get the tone from the top, which was a clear key enabler. So if you don't have that leadership support, probably you won't get anywhere. And then we appointed champions. And if I think on Europe, we appointed champions per category. So we have different people that are really leading this agenda in the different categories of spend. And I think over and above what the procurement-led initiative was, we also engage with the business. So we tried since the very beginning to have the business alongside with procurement. So I think that was pretty much the way that we landed, and we made public commitments to spend with diverse-owned businesses. So that's pretty much key headlines.
And that public commitment is a percentage, if I'm not mistaken. It's not a fixed number.
It's a percentage of our global spend. Is 10% by 2025 and 15% by 2030. Which I won't say is an easy one because complexities on tracking, etc. But yeah, I think at least it was a bold commitment, and it shows Diageo is really going after this initiative.
Fantastic, thank you. And maybe to go to you, Sarah, for BMS and your program, was this something that your clients pushed upon you, or was it something that was driven internally? Where did that real kind of impetus come from?
Hi, Jerome. Hi, everyone. So with regards to expanding our European, our supply diversity program into Europe, it was just a natural progression for us. So we started our program in the US around 2017. And then we did actually progress into some of the countries quite slowly. So we went into the UK because we knew that was a mature market. We went into Brazil, it's more of a mature market at that time. And then beyond that, we tried to look at all of the individual markets. And you'll know, some of you, that it's really challenging when it gets outside the UK. And so it took us a little while to agree with our legal team how we could approach our existing suppliers to identify who was a diverse business. And as you can imagine, BMS is quite risk averse, so it took us a little while to get to an understanding and sort of confirmation with our legal team that would ensure that whichever country we went out to, we were in no way going to offend anyone or upset anybody or exclude anyone, because of course we didn't want to go out with people to feel that they were part of a diverse group, but then our wording didn't allow them to confirm that to us. So that was kind of the next step, a logical next step for us anyway, identify what our current base is before we start to look more externally. And what that allowed us to do by being able to invite suppliers to tell us if they were diverse in each of the European markets was for us to have that baseline, build our own dashboard of our diverse suppliers, their capabilities, and which countries we use them in, and then of course what we spend with them. And then from there, we're able to identify the categories where we have gaps and where we actively need to encourage more diverse suppliers to come through to us in each of those countries. And that's how we're going to be expanding our program going forward.
Fantastic. And were there any specific resources or tools that you used to develop this baseline in these countries?
So I'm sorry, Manuela, there seems to be an echo. I'm not sure where the echo is coming from because I don't have anything else, but I'll try and move my phone away, maybe that might be it. So we didn't have a tool at the time, but we are building one at the moment. So initially, when we went out to all of our suppliers, we used good old-fashioned Excel to collect everything in. But we're currently working on our linking a supply diversity dashboard through to our spend portfolio. We use we spend Viz to capture our spend, and that dashboard is going to effectively link into that so that we can primarily identify our suppliers, but then also start to build that database to give us more information about our suppliers. We also want to expand it into our tier 2 so we can really understand, the supply chain that we have.
Fantastic. And that's absolutely a subject we want to delve into a bit in tier 2. Peter, could you walk us through, please? Accenture, obviously, been doing this since a while. So just maybe your supply diversity efforts, why was it important to Accenture? Where are you at the moment, and what are your plans?
Sure, thanks. So Accenture's program started in the US in 2002, almost as long as Accenture exists, primarily in the US back then, where we really matured our program. And in 2008-09, we decided to go global. And that was also the time when, together with a few other corporates, we co-founded WEConnect International, because we also thought, if we want to have a successful program, we need to have a strong NGO partner. And we thought focusing on women-owned businesses with WEConnect International was the right thing to do at the time. And we started with that in Canada and in the UK. And since then, we spread our program across 22 countries. Like Manuela, Diageo, we work with a very strong champions network. For us, it's very important that our leadership is engaged into our program. So, for instance, our team that runs our internal program reports to our CPO. So we want to make sure that the program is embedded in our procurement practices, but also linked to our internal stakeholders. So we want to make sure that we can collaborate on the global level, but also on the local level with the internal stakeholders, because they know exactly what the trends are. They, together with the procurement people, they can figure out, what are the sourcing opportunities that are coming up. So for us, it's also important that we understand what the trends are at Accenture, which contracts are expiring, and where can we consider diverse suppliers for. So that's really, we really look at it from a strategic perspective. Also, when we start the fiscal year, which starts first in September, before that, we already start planning and see, okay, what's going to happen in the next fiscal year? Where do we see opportunities, so that we know in advance where we can consider diverse suppliers for. So we do that in those 22 countries with procurement people, with champions, and we also want to make sure that we have local leadership engagement. A key element of our program is our development program. As you might know, we call it our Diverse Supply Development Program, which we're now doing in 7 countries. And it's a 12 to 18 months program where we mentor and train suppliers so that they can become ready to supply to companies like Accenture, so that they understand what they need to do when they participate in tenders. They know what our expectations are with regards to having a relationship with us. We also want to make sure that they, they don't be a big challenge supplying to a company like us, because, getting a large supplier getting a large client can be a risk, but we want to make sure that they don't have that risk anymore, and really, become successful as a supplier to us. So we do that now in 7 countries. Our last country is Australia, but we're also now going to look at South America to start with the SDP in the Middle East.
And I mean, a lot of you obviously mentioning, starting the US and then naturally branching out. You mentioned 22 countries, Peter. How did you select then after the US where to go? How did you prioritize?
Well, of course, first of all, we want to make sure that Accenture is there. So we need to have a footprint. We want to have a supply chain. We want to make sure that we have local leadership support. We really want leadership to carry this so that all our people will also get included, engaged. We want to make sure that we have a procurement team up there so that we have somebody locally as a champion to run the program for us, because they know the culture, the language, the opportunities, and they can also build a relationship with the local NGO or a local chapter of WEConnect International. So all those requirements are important, but we also, of course, need to look at what are the legal requirements. Like in South Africa, we have the broad-based Black economic empowerment, of course. In Australia, we have legislation around the Aboriginal community. But sometimes there can also be barriers. So we also want to make sure what can we do, what can't we do, and that's how we design our program. And where we see the most opportunities for success, that's where we start a program.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And Crystal, finally on to you. If you could please provide us an overview of your supply diversity and inclusion efforts at Meta.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. So we've had our program, like many people on the call, started in the US in 2016. We launched internationally in 2020. We're a very young organization. We launched our program internationally when we launched our sourcing team internationally. So originally our sourcing was only based in the US. And then we hired teams in LATAM, APAC, and EMEA. Unlike a lot of the companies on the call, we don't have people in market. We have people who are regional buyers. And our program is, I guess, country agnostic. So when we went international, we went into all markets at one time. So we only select, we want to work with the best suppliers. So where you're based does not impact your ability to work with us. So we include certified and self-declared suppliers. We've built our tools in order to be able to hold information about whether suppliers are diverse or not at the RFP and onboarding stage. So it does make our jobs quite hard, because we do have to go out and be really mindful on looking for diverse suppliers wherever they're based. But if, for example, our team in Ireland, which is predominantly where our marketing team are, want to work with one of the best social media agencies, we will look across all the different countries in Europe. Our program is very influenced by tools and processes. So we're a tech company. We've built our tools to help our stakeholders make informed buying decisions. So at every step of the process, we are nudging people to look for diverse owned companies. So it's very much built on connection, recommending diverse suppliers. We have an internal Google kind of search function, probably shouldn't say a competitor's name there, like that. Who will highlight and put diverse suppliers at the top of the list. We have a prospective supplier portal. So probably like many companies on the call, if you sign up as a prospective supplier and we feel that there is a product and service match, we will approve you to go onto our database as a light onboarding. So you're not fully onboarded, you don't go through all the kind of rigorous treks that you would be for an onboarded, but you will show up in our database. So essentially our MetaMates can search for a product or service and be able to find you, even if you haven't worked with us before. And then if you're successful in building relationship, connecting, winning a contract, you will be fully onboarded onto our database. But we try to do that so that we can expand the number of suppliers who we work with. Yeah, I think that probably covers our program.
So thank you very much for that. I'm going to be a little direct here, Crystal. Why is it important to have diverse vendors? Why is Meta placing such an emphasis on it?
Why is Meta placing such an emphasis on it? So I guess when we specifically for Meta, our focus is very much on innovation, and we feel that we get some of the best work from diverse suppliers because of the innovation that they bring. We're also really conscious of our, the users who are using our platforms globally, we need to make sure that we're representing and reflecting the communities and people that we work with. We work with a number of different partners as well. So we're really conscious of making sure that our supply chain reflects that. And diversity and inclusion is just good business sense.
Absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, call me biased, but I would agree completely. Lynn, Sarah, maybe just to go to you both, just because of the categories that your businesses operate in, are there any categories that you focus on in specific, when it comes to supply diversity and inclusion, and why? Just, maybe Lynn first.
Sure. So I think as a whole, first of all, I agree with so many of the comments that have been stated. It's and categories more or less fall into that same bucket. I think Peter was mentioning that there are some areas where you can lean more into and have more focus on. And then some areas that you may have some challenges in those regions implementing a program category of certain definitions. So some things are illegal in some areas, whereas they are not in others. But for us, I think that's where the agnostic piece came in. We do have a strategy of how we step into each region for sure, because we do want to make sure that we have the support in the region to roll out. But from a category standpoint, initially, Baker Hughes was probably more defined as to minority, women, LGBTQ, veteran, and that was probably it. At this point, we have really opened things up and asked the question to ourselves, why would we exclude anyone? If there's the ability to track the category in a certain region, the program definition is to open up opportunities for everyone. So why am I going to say except for X? So for us, it's opened up. And if there's a way of tracking the category, whether it's self-identification, and we try to get the evidence, because in that lane, look, we want to welcome companies that are not certified today, but are self-identified. We call them self-certified. And that way we can start a relationship with them, and we can possibly encourage them as to the benefits of being certified and introduce them to people like you, Jerome. It's one of the benefits there. But then of the people who are in the certified lane, it's making sure that we are working with those groups and having some emphasis within the company to see how we can actually bolster the spend that we have with those categories. And a last piece that we've added on is a small business tracking, so that we can actually measure how much we're working with small businesses, not to counteract or anything, but when you delve into those small businesses and you look at the diverse businesses, there are very few diverse businesses that are not small. There are some that don't fall in that category, but a lot of them do. So we want to make sure that we're working with these small businesses. And then there are times where you're working with those, and what do you learn? Oh, so you're a veteran-owned business. Oh, so you're actually a woman-owned business, but you've emphasized more on the small business because you felt there would be some discrimination coming your way if you identified as a woman-owned business. So we try to lean into all categories and have the internal support so that we can make sure that we're working with those groups to grow.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really interesting point as well, that you say, perhaps some might prefer to identify as a small business because obviously sometimes, we use labels to help us identify and really focus on a particular community to support. But sometimes labels, depending on, how they're applied, can also have a negative effect. So right. From what I'm understanding, US programs first, expanding internationally, focusing on creating those internal baselines. This is something you all shared. Understanding who your existing vendors are, getting them then to self-certify or self-register, or if they can, to actually certify as a diverse owned, and really trying to be as inclusive as possible. Sarah, then I'm going to change it up because a few mentioned, the importance of getting buy-in from senior leadership. How do you do that? I mean, how do you convince them that, you know, inclusive supply chain is important?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great to start with some case studies if you have. So we always highlight our diverse agencies and the work we do. And when we award to diverse agencies, we make sure that it's well announced internally so people know that there is expansion for our diverse suppliers as well. And the back of them doing some great work, we're then expanding them. We work with our diverse suppliers to open up in markets where we might need their services. So we've recently done that in Ireland with one of our diverse suppliers. And then again, that's a great story for us to tell internally. I think for me, the messaging I always give to my business partners is we're an inclusive organization. We're inclusive when it comes to looking at our patients and the people that we serve. We're inclusive in our employment when we go out to employ employees for our organizations. Then it makes natural sense for us to be inclusive in our supply chain as well. And why would we not want to test everything before we select so that we truly know we're getting the best? And ultimately, we are working to serve our patients. And so we want to give them that best quality. And we can only do that once we've seen everything that's available to us. And, you know, the other thing about working with diverse suppliers for us is it's not only the innovation that it brings, but it's also about economic development. We want to create wealth. We want to create jobs for diverse and small communities as well. And in addition to that, we do a lot of community projects, which we partner with diverse suppliers to do that so that we understand that when we spend money with diverse and small businesses, they are more likely to spend with diverse and small businesses, to employ diverse people. And so it really does have that ripple effect throughout. And we know that our patients could be anyone in those communities. And this is our way of also being inclusive with them as well.
And that's fantastic. I think it ties into a lot also what Crystal was saying, Lynn and so on, that basically, you know, having a supply chain that reflects your consumer base makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
Manuela, then, you know, you mentioned obviously the targets of 10% of spend, 15%. Are there other things or other KPIs that you track outside of spend?
So I think we report spend externally, but to get there, we really track a number of KPIs to ensure that we can drive our ambition in a healthy way, for a way of saying it. So what we call is our embed roadmap, is how supply diversity is embedded into our ways of working. So our contracts with non-diverse suppliers have an inclusion and diversity clause that we discuss and we negotiate with them. And it's all about the inclusion and diversity of their workforce, but also the inclusion and diversity of their supply chain. So that's one element. We created inclusive sourcing guidelines for our internal team to avoid bias in our sourcing process, and we track rate of inclusion and rate of award. So although we don't report externally the other KPIs, there's a number of things that we do internally to really get us to that increased spend. So yeah, that's pretty much what we have.
I think that's fantastic because obviously, you know, as we talk about, you know, getting the buy-in is one piece, but keeping the buy-in from senior leadership is, you know, another part of that. Peter, I have a question then for you. You know, you talked about champions at Accenture. How deep within the enterprise does this idea around supply diversity rise? Because I mean, Manuela obviously talked about tier 2, but what about internally within Accenture? You know, you're such a large organization.
Yeah, so our champions are most of the time from our procurement. We call it procurement plus, but they do. We always see our buyers or procurement people as advisors to our internal stakeholders. So, you know, that's how I always saw my job. And when I was a buyer, I always go out and find, you know, the right solutions to help my internal stakeholder to improve their operations. And that's how we also include diverse suppliers. You know, we are intentional in making sure that we engage diverse suppliers into our opportunities. But at the end of the day, it's just getting the right supplier. And that's how we also try to create success stories. We just put them in front of our internal stakeholders, and if they are the best match, they're going to be hired. That's how we look at it, and they happen to be diverse, and that's a great success story when they are diverse in this case. So that's how we look at it as well. Of course, thanks to our development program, we get a lot of people within our organizations to support and create success stories, because all our mentors are internal. All our mentors are senior level people within Accenture who volunteer to be a mentor in our program, and that's how we also create success stories within the organization. And of course, we make sure that these people get recognized so that others get inspired to do the same. And that's how we also spread the word and get more people engaged into our program.
That's fantastic. And I think, like Sarah was saying, this, importance of case studies to really show those results. Okay. So then I think one of the catches here, at least certainly one I've seen, is that, buying from diverse vendors is not always easy, because you can identify a great vendor, but, as Lynn mentioned, sometimes, they're SMEs, it can be a little hard. Crystal, would you mind walking us through this how-to guide, that you've created, or that Meta have created? Why was it important? What are some key takeaways there? What would be relevant then, from a corporate perspective, in buying from, and from a diverse vendor perspective in selling to?
I think probably one of the the two main reasons for creating that guide. I'll start with that first. So from the supplier point of view, one of the things that we've noticed is that not all diverse businesses will have business development managers. A lot of the time you'll be meeting founders, owners who might not necessarily be the right people to sell their services. I am not a great salesperson, but I think sometimes you have to acknowledge these things and either get the right person in or learn how you can be a better salesperson. So that was one of the kind of main elements, is how can what are some of the tips and tricks that people who are not natural salespeople can take away from that guide so that they can be better prepared to sell to a corporate? It's one of the biggest feedbacks that we get from our sourcing teams, that yes, this company was great, but they didn't sell themselves well. And then trying to put them in front of a stakeholder who has very high expectations, there can be that gap. And then the second piece was, a lot of companies will introduce themselves and say, I do X, Y, and Z. And you're like, okay, so I have no idea how this relates to what I'm buying. Like Meta is a software company. I'll give a classic example. Meta is a software company. We have, I don't know how many thousands of engineers. We have engineers coming out of our ears, and then someone will come and say, but I can create AI for you with my software engineers. I'm like, we create our own AI. We're just not going to buy those services. And so a lot of companies that perhaps don't do the research that they need to do up front to understand what are the services, what is this company buying? And there will be an overlap across all of these corporates on this call of similar things we're buying. We're probably all buying marketing services. We're probably all buying FM services. And then there'll be some areas where we'll be buying really weird niche services, like, I don't know, I'm pretty sure we buy like lightsabers and weird stuff for our Reality Labs teams, which I'm sure no one else is buying on this call. And then there'll be some things that, Diageo will be buying that we're not buying, and BMS will be buying, for example. But really understanding some of those examples and doing that research ahead of time to say, well, who should I be targeting? And why am I targeting them? And then bringing them back, that information back to your services is really useful to do up front. So those are the two primary examples for why we thought that guide would be really useful. And then in terms of like a corporate working with a small company, it can be challenging, right? There are benefits to it because the agility that a smaller company can bring is really useful. We noticed that in the pandemic, which I know always gets kind of raised as the example of why supply chain resilience is so important, but it's true. Agility is a big thing. That customer service that companies can provide, knowing that you have a direct line to a founder or founders of the company is a great sales piece for our internal customers who like to know that they are the center of the world of the people that they're dealing with. But then there can be challenges in terms of scaling. So I think being prepared to talk with a corporate about what do you know your challenges are for scaling, and then having a conversation about how you might how you might go around that, how you might kind of be able to scale for a company like Meta, for example. But then also thinking about who could you partner with in your network. We ran an RFP a few months ago, and a diverse supplier actually brought on board another diverse supplier to respond to the RFP. And that was brilliant because it brought in much needed subject matter expertise that supplier didn't have, and the two were able to put together a really great proposal. And that's also something to think about, kind of when you're thinking about, can you scale? Do you have the necessary information to respond to a proposal? Who could you also partner with? And what do you need from a corporate to be able to be successful?
I think there's a really interesting point there that you mentioned, which perhaps most diverse vendors might not realize, but just being, as you said, completely transparent about, you mentioned the point of scalability and so on. At what stage is that? After they sign the contract, so by then you can't go back, because they might worry that being transparent upfront might jeopardize any business opportunity.
I think it's obviously before the RFP, but the reason we have supply diversity teams is to have those conversations and be able to make those suggestions. I had a diverse supplier come up to me at an event recently, said, "Oh, I just responded to an RFI for you." I was like, "All right, you didn't tell me. You didn't give me any advance notice. I could have supported you. I'm not going to give you the answers, but I am going to be able to help you make sure that you put the best information forward, and so you're better in a position to win." So that transparency is really important. Being transparent with supply diversity teams, with your sourcing contact, and stakeholders. That's part of building relationships, being able to have those conversations. I'm not saying you go in and say, "Oh, I'm not going to be able to do this, I'm really weak." You sell the benefits, and then you're really clear about where the gaps are and what you need, but be doing it in a really professional, positive way. And there's a difference. And that's kind of what you need to make sure that you get right.
Absolutely. And I think a key piece as well there is that is very much that it's a group of allies. So I mean, as individuals working in supply diversity, you are looking to bring on more diverse vendors into your supply chain. So there's certainly this aligned interest. The next question I'm going to ask all of you, so I'm going to start with Lynn and just give you then the rest of the time to prepare, but it's very much about learning what went well, what didn't go well, what would you have done differently. And maybe we could start with sort of in the case of a few of you, you had US programs expanding into Europe. If you had the chance to do it again, what would you have changed? Lynn, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. Hindsight, man.
Yeah. They say vision is always 20/20 in hindsight.
Yeah, exactly. So I think one of the points you've heard a lot of so far, and it's speaking about the supplier development piece. We took steps to benchmark a lot of corporates and talk to a lot of our not only customers, but sometimes our competitors or in and external industry mates that could share some insights as to what their programs are. And we swung really for the fences. We were looking at some of the programs that had been established for 20 plus years, 10 plus years, and really wanted to understand how did you make it sustainable? So for us, I wouldn't change any of that, but I would say that we would work faster to identify suppliers that we could help develop and scale up. this is not a shot, because I've heard this, I think Crystal was just mentioning there, of the ability for the suppliers to come to us and say, hey, guess what, I was included in this, this project bid, or whatever, and it's great, but we should have established some relationships, a lot of communications, so that those persons, when they had the opportunity, they could reach out to us and say, hey, this is what I'm bidding on. Any insights you can give us, some key knowings of this scope. What is Baker Hughes really looking for? Because if they lean more to the price side, and really we are looking at someone who we can partner with on the enhancement side, we could be totally off with this project that we're bidding on. And that supplier needed maybe that little bit of insight, and we could have done some background work for them. But then, just the overall, like I said, the development piece of helping a supplier understand what is necessary when you're trying to work with a company like Baker Hughes. Where should you be thinking as to, or what should your mindset be when you're trying to get in the door? Because again, to the point that was made, if you're approaching Baker Hughes with, look, we have these capabilities, and that's some of our core competency that we're not going to outsource, then you're not even going to breach the front door. So we have to make sure that when you're talking about how agile your company is, I had a supplier approach us when we were talking early on, and they said, look, tell us what your blind spots are. Tell us what your challenges are, so that we can find ways to address those. Now, if you're wanting to actually get in the door of Baker Hughes, I mean, that's a conversation to have. So I think it would have been really having some developmental discussions with these suppliers, so that they understand what we are actually needing a supplier to think like. The suppliers that have been working with us for a long time, they are more of this structure, and let us kind of coach and develop you to get there. So we're actually starting that program now, but it should have been something that was a long time ago.
And I'm going to take up one of the points you mentioned earlier, because obviously we have a lot of corporates on this call who are looking to develop their own programs. So what you mentioned there, feedback from peers who have already been in, or had inclusive supply chains, been working on supply diversity, I think is very interesting. Sarah, anything, in hindsight that, might be beneficial to corporates on this call who don't have programs yet, that you looked into, you learned, maybe some key takeaways that they could take, help them skip a few years?
I mean, I think definitely I would just echo that point about reaching out to your peers. And when I'm in conferences, like the last couple of weeks, and I've met corporates that are very early on in their journey, the first thing I say is, please don't create anything before you've reached out to somebody in your network, whether that's me or somebody else, because 99% of the time it's being done. And this is one of the great things about supplier diversity, is there's no competition between us. So we're more than happy to share all our information, the diverse suppliers that we use, where we use them, etc. Because the more that we can share that information, the quicker people get onto their journey. And we really want to promote the diverse suppliers. So I want them to be successful, and I want more people to use them so that they can grow their capabilities and maybe the countries that they're in as well. Because then that helps me to be able to, further the work that we do with them as well. I think something I would have liked to have done earlier is certainly connect with my diversity and inclusion team internally. And I wish I had done that because it was just through a random conversation, and I brought our global inclusion and diversity lead to the ESDB conference last week, Melly. And it was just through a random conversation I had with her, and I was talking to her about supply diversity and why it fits so well into our inclusion and diversity agenda internally within BMS. And then I found out that actually they're on this journey where they're educating our senior level managers across all of our countries And so now we're able to work together and include supplier diversity into that training module that they're doing, which is great because the more people that talk about it internally, the more support we get. And it also becomes then a normal part of our everyday conversation. So I think definitely tap into internal resources, particularly if you also have like employee groups. So we have groups that represent Black, Asian, Hispanic groups. We have older employee groups that we have. We also have LGBTQ employees as well. So again, by tapping into those groups, we're able to bring them onto the journey. Because again, it is we represent the same people, whether it's through diverse suppliers, employees, or patients.
I love that point, because obviously, you know, for yourselves as corporate, you're all so large that there's so many different conversations going on internally that, often people could be working on similar things without even realizing. And of course, I will take the opportunity here to jump in from what you and Lynn mentioned, the benefit of advocacy groups, because obviously, you know, there is no competition here. It's about bringing, you know, everyone in the space together to really share at conferences, in person, etc. And I think one of the key takeaways for me is how can we really go beyond, you know, just, 1 hour sessions, and how can we really get, you know, opportunities to deep dive as corporates all together so that we can really walk away, you know, with real learnings. Manuela, things that you would have done differently, any takeaways that the audience, these corporates who are looking to kind of decide whether they should set up their own programs, what should they be doing? What should they be thinking about?
So I think for me, you mentioned advocacy organizations. I think the knowledge is there with the peers. So speaking with peers, I remember one of the first thing I did was to speak with Peter Serp. And then he mentioned the key themes that he would do to really set up the program. So really speaking with others and getting their knowledge, it's super important. Advocacy organizations, I remember quite a lot of conversations with Michael Tobolsky on how to set up this, on what were my fears, and how can I drive this internally. And he really helped me to drive this ambition with the structure and knowledge, because the knowledge is absolutely there. And the two things I would do different, one internally and the other one externally. So overall, to do it faster. So I think breaking barriers internally and really ensuring that people are not biased against diverse businesses is one of the things I would do faster. And I think the way to do it is to really show best cases and best practices and success stories that we now have across the business. It completely changes the face of the people that I'm talking to if I really tell a nice story. And then externally, Lynn and Sarah and Crystal mentioned around the development. So how can we really support diverse businesses better? And there are multiple ways to do that in a much more structured and formal way, or just by having conversations and really breaking those barriers. So that will be the two key things.
Thank you very much for that. And, you know, your point about success stories reminded me also what, you know, Crystal was saying, where, you know, sometimes the vendors don't even mention that they're doing. So, you know, perhaps I shouldn't be saying this, but, you know, we also have cases where, you know, we connect, vendors with the corporates, and we don't even hear back from the vendors, you know, if anything has happened and so on. So I think communication is definitely as well a point there. Peter, from Accenture's point of view, any key takeaways for the corporates here? What should they be doing? What should they try and avoid? Anything contentious maybe that, you know, didn't go well that you tried? Or
well, we mentioned champions a lot here, and I started excuse me, I started as a champion as well as a +1. And what I would say is, especially at the beginning, you know, people who know me know that for me it's always hard to say no. So if somebody comes up and pings me and say, "Oh, I see you're doing a program, biodiversity program. I want to do it in my country as well," and I used to go like, "Yes, of course, let's work together on it." But then you hang it to a person, so that person is very excited, very engaged, they're creating success, but then they leave the company, and then it all collapses again. So what I learned from that is that we have to be more strategic about it, but we also have to make sure that it's not just a +1. We have to integrate it in people's roles, because then it's not a person, it's a role. And if somebody then leaves the company, the role's still there, so they have to find a successor for that person to fill in the gap. And that way you have more sustainability in that program, because there will always be somebody who will drive it on a local level, and it doesn't hang on a person. So that's what I've learned from it, to be more strategic about it, make sure that it becomes part of a role, make sure that people are also recognized for the work that they're doing, so that they stay engaged and stay excited. But also you're creating positive peer pressure. That's what I learned as well, is, you know, if you create success with people, you recognize them for it, and you put them on stage for it, other people get inspired and say, hey, this person is recognized for their work. You know, they made a promotion because they did so well on supply diversity as well. Maybe I should start it as well. And yeah, we see that really helps within our organization.
That's fantastic. And also a chance to congratulate you on your recognition last week for the work that you did.
Oh, thank you.
Crystal, what about for you? And maybe just one other piece I want to throw in there, because obviously being an exception here, that you launched your program globally all at once. So, you know, from that perspective, were there any learnings or advice you would share for other corporates?
I guess the thing, and you've just probably triggered this, befriend legal is my number one tip. That's especially in Europe and this region. I think engaging with legal very early on. We did do it. It took a long time. If there was one thing that I would do differently, it would to do that a lot faster. You need a dedicated person. And at the time when I was going through our legal review process, I was only part-time on supply diversity, so probably thinking about how I could put somebody full-time to really drive that initial launch, and working with the cross-functional partners. And then I guess really building on a lot of what Peter's just said. We had a huge team last year. We had 12 people working on supply diversity. We now only have 3 people, and we've had to really change the way that we drive the program, and we've had to put in, you know, like Peter's kind of talked about, very strategic, integrated programs to drive supply diversity, rather than rely so heavily on having a large number of people. And we've had to work very closely to realign the way that we work with some of our cross-functional teams to make sure that this is not just this is not just our responsibility, this is everybody's responsibility, and this is part of everybody's job. And we go into it very much with the focus that our role shouldn't exist. So how can we build for a time when that doesn't exist, which means that it's fully integrated into the company. But yeah, I think getting somebody who would be full-time on launching a program is probably something that I would change about the way that we did it.
That's fantastic. And I think also, as you say, you know, we look forward to a day when WEConnect doesn't need to exist, simply because it's just not necessary. So in terms of takeaways, then I think some really fantastic ones. So obviously befriending legal early on, especially if you deal in multiple countries. We've seen obviously in the EU, you can't positively discriminate. You know, there are differences between countries as well. Creating internal pressure, you know, through recognition to encourage performance. You know, obviously integrating supply diversity and inclusion within the role and not just the individual, so that it does continue. Connecting internally with others who are working on DE&I efforts. So I guess from there we could zoom out maybe ESG or CSR and how that fits into that wider piece. You know, talking to your peers. So I think that's a key piece for the corporates on here who don't have programs yet. You know, there are many who do have fantastic programs. Do reach out to them. And of course, one can do so through advocacy groups. And because I don't see questions in the chat, I'm going to take advantage here. You know, we've just come off the back of a few events. This is an open one for all of you. You can answer in whichever order you like. And this now just goes back to, you know, kind of what are you looking for at conferences? So we've just been to a few conferences. What are your key, you know, kind of takeaways that you try to get out of them? Who would like to take it first?
I can go first. I'll be really brief. I go in with two things in mind. One, some of the key areas that we need to implement more diverse suppliers. So I typically have a list of those commodities that I'm trying to focus on. But then it's also connections with a lot of you on the call, so that we can actually build that bridge of, how can we strengthen those relationships in industry and out of industry. So, if I was at the previous conference that you all just left, there's no way I would have left without talking to Peter, Crystal, Sarah, Manuela, any of you that were there, to make sure we introduced ourselves and set up a call for after the conference was over. So those are some of the things.
Fantastic.
So I think same here. Networking is fundamental. You learn so much from others. And I think Sarah mentioned before that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Someone else have done it before. So I think sharing our experiences is fundamental. And the other one is finding suppliers. So as Lynn mentioned, we had a list of commodities that we want to buy, and we had connections with lots of diverse businesses. So that's the two main takeaways.
Wonderful. And then just to maybe jump in, so when you do meet vendors at these events, and maybe the others can answer, what do you encourage then for the vendors? I know our audience here is really corporates, but if you meet diverse vendors, in terms of follow-up and so on, what would you like that to look like in an ideal world?
I'm happy to jump in here. So for me, if I connect with a supplier, a diverse or small business that I think we have the potential to work with, I'll always ask them to send me just one slide so that I can use that as a conversation starter internally. I look after advertising, so of course that's easy for me to do, but we have category managers across all our categories. And so that one slide really helps me. And also I think if you can't put your compelling story on one slide, then it probably will get lost in multiple slides after that. And then secondly, I will follow up with those conversations with those category leaders and try to make introductions, whether that's in our tier 1 or tier 2, and then see how that relationship progresses. I think people know I'm really honest, so I will tell people up front whether I think there's an opportunity or not, and that remind them that opportunities can be over any period of time. It can be a day, a week, or it can be 3 years.
And I think that's a wonderful point as well. Also, just being honest, if there's not an opportunity, just saying, hey, look, thank you very much for your time. We're not, like you alluded to, Crystal, you're not going to be buying from engineers. Crystal, Peter, some last thoughts? We have 1 minute left.
I guess one of the tips that I would suggest is if you talk with, I don't know, for example, Manuela on the call and she doesn't have an opportunity, ask her who can she introduce you to, who else might, on this call, for example, might be buying your services. That's something that, a lot of the time we're not buying certain services. So I will make it a point to introduce people. So from last week, I have a long list of suppliers that I am going to be recommending to my corporate peers. Ask for those introductions. Who can you recommend, and give guidance that way.
And Peter, final thoughts on the benefits of meeting in person?
Definitely the networking, but also learning. Last week at the conference, I learned a lot about legal again. There was a lot of conversation about what's possible, what's not possible in the European Union, and that's always a topic that we need to discuss. So I learned a lot from that, and also got a little confused again, of course, because it's very confusing and complicated. And definitely meeting suppliers is important. Make sure that you are very honest, like what said before. If it's not a match, just tell them upfront that they don't waste their time, because they're small businesses. You don't want to waste their time, and ask for more information so that you can follow up. So yeah, it's the same with the others say, but learning is you learn a lot from those conferences, so definitely will recommend, if you can and have travel budget, to go to them. Amazing.
So thank you so much to our panelists, Lynn, Peter, Sarah, Manuela, Crystal. Really fantastic having your insights. Yeah, I really appreciate your time a lot. On behalf of WEConnect International, having you as corporate members really means a lot to us. For all of you joining, hopefully this session was valuable. If you have any points you would like to raise, please do get in touch. We also, and here I'm going to also drop in the fact, we have this amazing community of women-owned businesses, a lot of whom actually provide services around how to build up your supply diversity and inclusion programs. So please do not hesitate to get in touch. There's a lot of amazing consultants out there who happen to be small but very specialized. So thank you for your time. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.